Welcome, everybody. This is Hear Her Sports. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Elizabeth Emery. Today's guest is hardworking Sarah Ditmars, a kinesiologist, a trainer with a Junior A men's hockey team in Canada, and a personal trainer. In 2017, the Ontario Junior Hockey League named her Trainer of the Year. This was super huge because in school she was told she'd never work for a men's team. Women work with women and men work with men. We talk about that and about why she's not a team trainer in women's hockey. Sarah's other business is personal training. Very recently, she developed a coaching program to help retired female athletes. I completely relate to this. It is absolutely not easy leaving a sport you have been committed to and focused on for many, many years. Competing and training become part of an athlete's identity. So what happens next? Sarah works with athletes very individually and has worked with hundreds of women, so she's able to answer that question. We also talk about heartbreak, who's an athlete, breaking boundaries, fitting workouts into an already packed schedule, being an underdog, nutrition with, of course, a few words about meal planning. Well, let's get to it. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. And thank you so much for reaching out and making time to be here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for fitting me in.
Sure. Could you introduce yourself and give us a rundown of everything you do?
Okay, well, my name is Sarah Ditmars, and I am the owner and creator of Sarah Ditmars Sports Performance. So basically, I am a registered kinesiologist, which in Ontario, Canada, is a regulated health profession. And I work with athletes that are currently in the game. So currently, I work with a Junior A men's hockey club, and I'm basically their trainer, their strength coach. So I fix them when they're hurt, help them get through a lot of other obstacles, and then, of course, work with them in the gym throughout the season. I also work with people, specifically like former female athletes is basically my niche. And I help these women overcome the transition of leaving sport and entering the real world, kind of like dealing with their quarter-life crisis.
So one thing that I'm really excited about is you've worked with and coached and trained so many women over the years. So what I'd like to start out with is, what's engaging you right now and what have you been thinking a lot about?
So I started working with athletes in 2009. I was still a undergraduate student at the time, but I worked with like the varsity teams at Brock University. And I've worked with so many women, and predominantly I honestly love working with women. It's a lot easier for me to relate to them. I get their story a little bit more than a male story. Like men, like they're just a whole different species. So, so I've worked with them for so long. There's hundreds of women that I've literally worked with throughout the teams and my individual clients. And every year, some of my athletes end up retiring. So whether that's from a season-ending or career-ending injury, or they're moving on, or they're aging out. But since I've been doing it for so long, it's like every year I have like a graduating class, so to speak.
Right.
And so what's really driving me now is like what happens when it ends.
Yeah, and I was sort of struck by that new program. When did you start that program?
I started it 3 months ago now. It's very fresh.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was really struck by that. And so what are the challenges that they're facing going through that transition?
Well, first of all, it's like losing your first love. It's like you spent, 18, 20 years playing that sport, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's over. So it's like this major heartbreak. And some women are very happy to move on into the next stage of that life, whether that's like they want to have a family or they're just burnt out. So some women are ready to move on, but some really have a really hard time at letting it go. So, you have this identity shift. How do you introduce yourself to people? Hey, I'm Sarah. I play, now you don't play that anymore. Now, how do you introduce yourself? Or a lot of the times, you go to family Christmas and then there's your uncle over there that you haven't seen forever. He's like, oh, Sarah, how's hockey? Oh, I'm not playing hockey anymore. And then it's like the conversation dies. So it's like finding this, how do you relate to yourself? How do you find passion to still work out or eat properly?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of like binge like, oh yeah, I don't have to weigh in this week, so I'm just gonna have a little bit more wine and cheese on the weekend or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot that like you have to get through, and it's super difficult.
Yeah, that identity piece is really interesting to me because so many women that I talk to, I mean, even high level women, are not comfortable saying I'm an athlete. So, then not playing your sport, I can imagine like really messes with things.
Of course, and I've always told people like you don't have to necessarily be in a competitive, organized sport to say that you're an athlete. So I have a client
Right.
who always did individual sports when she was in high school. So looking at like figure skating, and it was a club level, so it was still competitive. There was still some sort of competition to it, but then took up running at the end of high school, and then now, late 20s, early 30s in that phase, started doing rock climbing. Moved out to British Columbia and lives on Vancouver Island, which is gorgeous. And if you ever have a chance to go out there and climb the rocks. Like it's the mountains are absolutely stunning. Anyway, so she's like, I feel like an athlete for the first time in my life. And I'm like, well, you are. You have an activity that you train for, you eat for. You go to the gym and try and increase your grip strength and your upper body strength. You were training, and you are an athlete, but never really kind of saw herself in that light.
Was she able to accept that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's really like escalated her training,
Oh, cool.
right? Like
That's
she's
great.
really like, wow, I'm really into this right now. And of course, like I'm training to do this and trying to increase the grades of how hard and how difficult the climbs are. So, but yeah, you're right. Like saying that word and labeling yourself as an athlete can sometimes be like, well, I'm not an athlete. Whoa, right? And you kind of like hide under a rock, so to speak, because you don't want that. Like, sometimes people don't want the pressure that comes with that, right?
Right.
Because it can be, which is why I'm saying some women are actually happy to move outside of that kind of identity or label.
The women that you're working with, what are they looking for, in the next stage? Like, how do they want to incorporate being physical into their life?
So it's a great question, and it's honestly it's something that I'm still trying to learn what people want, and that'll obviously help them more. But the feedback from the market research I've done is like having something that you're passionate about and a purpose to why you need to or you want to go to the gym 3 days a week or however many days a week or eat properly, like having some sort of like not an obligation, but like a greater cause.
I think that's a hard thing to find after you compete because, you're not going to compete in the sport that you have been competing in. So do you switch sports? Do you do your same sport but at a lower level or not compete? I mean, it can be a strange place to be.
100%. And it's so different for so many people. Some people, they like to play like an adult recreational level of whatever the sport is. Some people don't enjoy that at all. Actually, the big common thing with hockey specifically is you start playing what we call, and you call beer league hockey. You start playing this adult recreation pickup style. And if you're good, people just like, they just slash you and they just make it really hard for you to have a good time because you're so much higher, like they're so much better than them, which I mean, it is what it is. But so some people have a really hard time going to that level. Some people enjoy it. Some people really start becoming interested in and start, doing like foam runs, those obstacle courses, Spartan runs, or like some other sort of competition, even like weightlifting or powerlifting competitions. Like some people find like those types of competitions can help motivate them, but then other people, they don't want to do that. Maybe they don't like running. Maybe they have a knee that doesn't allow them to do that anymore. Like now what is the next thing for them?
Right. What are you talked about whys? So what are the whys that you're hearing from the athletes that you're working with?
A lot of it goes back into like deep self-reflection. So really looking back at the story of your life and looking at, the common themes. So my common theme and when I look back to my story is I've always been an underdog. Like when I see that word, I'm like, that is me. That's my life. Like I've had to literally like, I feel like I'm constantly proving people wrong, and that's a big motivator for me. So honestly, like finding finding your story and really evaluating yourself, reflecting on yourself, inspecting that kind of story and seeing like what kind of person you want to be. So as an underdog previously in the past, I want to not be the underdog. I want to be a leader, right? So by leading by example is something that really motivates me to do like my workouts every day, to inspire other people by sharing my story, to really like make sure that I'm always accountable to myself, really. So for some people, it could be those races, but for those whys, it really depends on their personal story. And if you really spend time like investigating your own life, like doing personality tests, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Right? Things like that you can learn about yourself. You really learn about yourself, you can really figure out what your why is.
Do you help your athletes find that why?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the very first thing that my athletes do when they work with me is that they go through it's a mini program, and it helps them investigate and reflect and then find a progression for how to become. So moving backwards, so reflecting back on their life, finding out the stories and the things that have happened to them previously, what kind of predisposed responses they have to certain situations, inspecting their themselves. So then doing some personality tests, physically writing out their story, and really like diving deep into like their own life. And then the progression is to find out how you can become the person that you want to be. So kind of rewriting your story.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. Honestly, it is. But like, it's so much more. It's so much more than just setting goals and signing up for a 5K. It's so much more than that. And people kind of skim the surface when it comes to goal setting. So the reflection, inspection, progression is the first thing. And then after you do that, then you move into goal setting. And then I like to do fear setting after that.
Yeah, talk about fear setting. I've never heard of that before, but yeah, talk about fear setting.
Fear setting is amazing. So fear is a common theme in everyone's life. We don't do, some people don't like to go on podcasts because they're scared of speaking. Right. You're always scared. Like there's always this fear that kind of holds us back. So when it comes to goal setting, people always skim the surface. They always just kind of go surface level. So if, for example, I want to lose 8 pounds in 8 weeks or 6 weeks, where there's other evidence out there and there's other programs out there that promise a little bit more than that. So specifically speaking, I have a nutrition program that's 6 weeks. And on average, out of about 50 women of every level you can imagine, they lose about 15 to 20 pounds. At the very beginning, wow. I make you do a goal setting. People are like, 8 to 10 pounds. But I just told you, like, there's a lot of evidence saying that people can lose 15. So why aren't you going for 15? Fear of failure, fear of dropping out, fear of not getting what they want, fear of disappointment, right? All of these types of fears. So fear is a huge, huge part of it all. So after people set their goals, then I make them do what I call fear setting. And fear setting is literally listing all of the most horrible things that can happen. It sounds a little bit like opposite of what we want, very deconstructive, but you list everything that could go wrong. So if I don't lose that 15 pounds, am I at risk of heart failure or heart disease? Am I not going to be able to run around with my kids? Am I not going to be able to play hockey on the weekend? Am I not going to be able to, and everyone's situation is different. For me, losing 15 pounds won't really make a big difference on those things, but for someone who's starting off, that's a huge, huge deal. So in the next column next to that, after writing all of the most horrible situations you can possibly imagine, it's how likely is this to happen? Pretty likely, not likely. And in the last column, what do you do to prevent that? So everyone's situation is very different, but it could be things like, I'm going to make sure that I don't miss a workout. I'm going to make sure that I drink enough water every day. I'm going to make sure I sleep 8 hours every night, and going on from there. So you set your goals, and then you set your fear goals, and then you just take the ground running.
So explain to me how sort of the mechanism of fear setting versus goal setting works.
So for like I said, for goal setting, you always skim the surface, and they don't really dive deep into like really going for things they really want, which then means that they don't really push themselves very hard. Fear setting allows you to just be super real and say what you're the most scared of. And when you're the most scared of something, then you really want to make sure that doesn't happen to you.
Do people end up resetting their goals after they've done the fear setting?
Great question. It always
Yeah.
happens. It always happens.
Wow.
They usually always go back and go, okay, maybe I can, maybe I can lose that 15, or maybe I can, depending on what their goal is, right? But it almost always makes their goal a little bit more intense, and then it makes the work that they do to get to that goal a lot more intense.
Cool. Really great. So you mentioned that you are training yourself. So, what is your story? What kind of sport do you do, and what did you do?
So by no means was I ever on the path of becoming a pro anything, to be honest. I was very much, I did a lot of things. When I was young, the first thing I ever played was t-ball. Then I played soccer from the age of 5 all the way to 18, 20, 21. But I played hockey, and that was kind of my main thing. I started playing hockey, I think when I was 10 or 11. And I played all the way through high school, and then I stopped playing at high school because, to be honest, I loved it, but I knew it was going to be over at the end of high school, and I wasn't gonna go away on a scholarship by any means. So when I stopped playing hockey and I went to university, I gained about 18 pounds. So I went from 136 pounds up to just over 150 pounds my first year, because I wasn't playing hockey for the first time in my life. I was drinking way too much alcohol. I was sleeping until noon for the first time in my life. I religiously wake up at 7 o'clock every day. So my whole life had changed in that first year. I'm like, man, I need to figure my stuff out here. So I started playing intramural hockey through the university. And then I kind of filled the void that I missed. I missed hockey so much. I filled that with working in hockey. And ever since then, I've had to lead by example. So my biggest motivation is to make sure that I am doing what I expect others to do. So eating properly and going to the gym regularly.
Right. You're working with a men's hockey team right now. Would you like to work for a women's hockey team?
Of course, I would love to work for a women's hockey team. I mean, when I was in university and I was working I started with the rugby team, and then I moved over to the hockey team in the next year. And my professors and the coaches at the university always had this rule that women work with women and men work with men. And there was no crossover, which was fine to me because there was a women's hockey team and I could work in hockey with the women. But then towards the end of my master's degree, when I was for sure moving on to something next, I was like, well, that's it. Just like hockey was over at the end of grade 12, being an athletic therapist ended at the end of my master's degree, because there's no way that I could get a job working for a women's hockey program, just because professional women's hockey or any higher level of women's hockey does not have a high budget. They struggle with getting people to their games. Players do not make any money or much money at all, to be honest.
Oh my God, their salaries it's just shocking.
It's absolutely shocking. And they actually get deducted their salary based on missing games or practices. And everyone that plays in those leagues has to maintain another career.
Right.
So say you're a mortgage broker, right? And you're working 9 to 5 and you can't make a practice. Now your hockey salary is deducted because you have to be at work.
Your mini hockey salary.
Your mini hockey salary, right? So I knew
Right.
that was never going to be something that was super realistic for me. So I kind of was like, okay, I'll let it go. And then when I moved back in with my parents as a very broke 23-year-old, the president of the hockey club that I work for now approached me at a clinic that I was working at and said that he wanted me to work for his team. And I was like, well, what? And then the rest was history. I've been there for 6 years.
Yeah. And did you go into school knowing you wanted to go into sports in some way?
I wanted to be a physiotherapist, to be honest. And then I had to do a bunch of shadowing, et cetera, when I was in my undergrad. And through my shadowing experience, I saw so many different demographics and problems. I did a lot of like home care physiotherapy shadowing. So you go into the home of the client and take care of them there. And this one client was a triathlete, and he had a hip replacement. And he was on the end of his recovery, and he was about to get back on his bike. I was so like I could feel his energy and his passion in it. I was just so attracted to like working with that one client versus other clients that didn't have necessarily a sport background or sport motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew at that point, I was like, well, I don't really think I want to do physiotherapy and I want to work with athletes. So from that point on, I was like, well, I'm going to build something for myself that allows me to do that.
Yeah, speaking of building something, you have a training app, your own training app. Oh my goodness.
I do. You know what? Like no one's going to give you anything unless you go and get it.
That's
So
incredible.
if you know, I live in a very small community where I grew up. I had to go for what I wanted. Like no one was going to give it to me. There's no outstanding job opportunities that were going to have a high ceiling of achievement in my small community. So I had to build one for myself.
Did you build the app yourself?
To be honest, I have a third party, so I can't take too
Okay.
much credit on that. So I can't like pretend that I'm some crazy code writing tech genius. That's not me at all. But again, looking out for opportunities and looking for things that make things easier on yourself and then making it easier to help the people that you want to help.
Yeah, it's really nice. You're in the gym training, and so I wanted to ask a little bit about like the athletes that you're working with. What kind of regimen are you putting them on?
Mostly it's a functional strength training program. So a lot of focus around natural primal movements. So making your body actually move in ways it should move. And of course, are incorporating strength around muscle imbalances, which prevents injury. And of course, gets them the strength, the gains that they're actually looking for.
What are your challenges that you're facing when you're working with the athletes?
Well, athletes are always a good example because they have a background. They've done things before. But for instance, my soccer athletes, they don't predominantly work a whole lot on certain areas of their upper body. So the challenge of that is to make sure that they have an upper body that matches their lower body. So they are preventing spinal or hip injury, but they're also making sure that they're very well rounded. And for hockey players, you depending on the way that you shoot, you're predominantly stronger on one side than the other. So trying to make sure that you can kind of round that out, so to speak, as well. For people who are in season, you're not really fixing that imbalance because it's important to be stronger on that one side. But for the athletes moving out of sport, now you've got to correct all the things that they've incurred over the years.
Yeah, stuff that they've ignored.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how does nutrition fit into all of that?
There's so many people that have neglected what they ate because it didn't always make a noticeable difference for them when they were in sport, which sounds a little bit funny. You think that if, as an athlete, you have to watch what you're eating very critically, because you need that extra bump or an extra advantage when you're playing. But for some of them, because they're burning so many calories in a day through their workouts, their practices, and everything they're doing, they can kind of afford to slip a little bit and have extra calories, so to speak. So then when you move out of the sport and your activity level naturally just decreases, there's no way that you're doing 2 days again. Now your whole calorie consumption and build of everything in your nutrition has to change. So it's teaching them, okay, well, even though you were doing this before and it worked for you before, now you're in a totally different, structure.
The hardest thing for me, when I was competing and training, every day was very intense, as you said, 2 a days. And so my eating was pretty regular. And now that I'm not doing that, there are some days that I exercise way more and my caloric needs are higher. And that's where I have trouble is how to figure out how to eat for what I'm actually doing. Because oftentimes I'll undereat and then, it's days for me to get back on track.
Of course. So, that's where you have carb cycling and the calorie differences on training days versus non-training days. Whereas when you're training for a sport and you're in your sport, every day is so intense.
Yeah.
You might have 1 day off or 2 days off, depending on the schedule. But predominantly, you need to be consuming a high level of calories so that you can make sure that you have the energy to burn it off. And like you said, when you undereat, now that those days aren't consistently as hard, or as intense, your body has to catch up and it takes a while. So basically, when it comes down to it and you take the athlete hat off and you put on your regular day hat, you, like I said before, like your calories and everything are so different. So if now that you don't have sport, the most of the work, if you're trying to lose the weight, has to come from food. So you have to make sure that the calories represent the activity you're doing now. Whereas before, if say you're at a 2,000 calories a day because you're an athlete and you're working out 2 days, every day you're doing something, versus now you're not, the calories need to reflect the activity level. So much more of it needs to come from what you're eating and not relying on the activity to burn it all off.
And do you recommend tracking? Tracking calories in work effort.
I absolutely love counting macros, so macronutrients, so your carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. However, it's a very hard thing for someone to sustain if they've never done it before. So instead of worrying too much about the calorie level, just making sure that you have the right amount of each macronutrient, which if you hit those, then you hit the calorie level. Mm-hmm. If you start focusing on that and actually tracking it, then that's a very specific goal to hit every day.
Do you have an example meal plan that you like to recommend?
I could definitely build one. Honestly, everything I do, Elizabeth, is so customized. I do not do cookie cutter. I do not do, because it does not work. But if I had to give a very generic, female structure, I would say 100 grams of protein a day and under 100 grams of carbohydrates a day and about 40 grams of fat a day. If I had to make it cookie cutter, if I had to, but everything I do is it depends. It depends on, your age, your height, your weight, your activity level, what you like, what you don't like.
Is that sort of high on the protein?
No, everyone is so low on protein, which is one of the biggest reasons why we feel hungry and why we have a hard time seeing anything happen in the gym, because your body needs to go through protein synthesis. So your body needs protein, the macronutrient, to help build the muscle. So even though you're in the gym, working out, your muscle is actually built outside of the gym in the recovery phase and by eating properly.
Do you have proteins that you like, or do you do the protein powders?
I do, yes. Any type of whey isolate protein is really quickly absorbed by your body. And there's a lot in the market that don't taste like crap. But there are a lot on the market that are full of fillers, sugars, and, gums and bad, like honestly horrible things to be consuming. But they put that stuff in there to make it taste good. So then you buy it.
Right. Since you've worked with so many women, I mean, one of the things that really interests me about what you're doing is, have you seen themes that affect or are impacting, the athletes that you're working with? I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, for example, I think it was on your website, was training and competing during your menstrual cycle or dealing with your menstrual cycle. That's
a huge, huge, huge thing that a lot of people kind of don't even pay any attention to at all. So your menstrual cycle is 28 days. Let's call it 28 days. And there's 2 phases. So the first phase that you go through is 2 weeks, and the second phase is 2 weeks. So the first phase, you have a higher level of estrogen, so the female sex hormone. There's lots of different types of estrogen as well. So like there's not just one type of estrogen. So that level goes high. And then at the start of the next phase, estrogen goes down and progesterone goes up. And when progesterone goes up, that's where we get excess bloating. And like we need to consume about 100 to 300 calories more per day on average. But we typically we typically end up eating an extra 500 calories during that phase.
Huh.
And that affects everything. So now like your body naturally needs more calories during that phase. And either you're neglecting it or you're overeating and you don't really know why. So people that crave things or really want carb dense sweets or heavy heavy meals, which obviously affects like the bloating and weight gain and all of these things. And then so at the end of that phase is when we start having what people call their menstrual cycle. So your 7 days, and then it restarts. So we kind of tend to feel really bad and poorly about ourselves in that second phase, because like we're very emotional and we're going through this big shift in hormones and we're like, oh my goodness, right? So there's the PMS phase and all of the things that come in that. And then we're like, oh, I need to start getting back in the gym. I need to start things. And that's when we decide we want to do it, because it's very impulsive, I feel really horrible about myself and I need to do something. And so then you start the worst time ever. Whereas if you start at the beginning of the first phase, if you wait for the cycle to end and you start at the beginning of the next phase, estrogen actually helps you feel a little bit stronger and you don't have that excess bloating. So that's actually the right time to start something. So whereas men don't have estrogen and progesterone. They have the exact same level of testosterone every single day. They never change. It's the same amount of testosterone. So they don't have a fluctuating hormone level. So they don't see any difference. Whereas we go through these two phases of two different spikes, so to speak. So it can really affect a lot of things. And it's not until people kind of start paying attention to that they kind of, oh, this is my skinny week. Let's say like the first week of the first phase. Oh, okay, this isn't actually that bad. Or understanding, oh my goodness, this must be, the start of that second phase, that luteal phase. This is why I'm actually feeling a little squishy, right? Maybe I'm bloating. Oh, that's what's happening. And understanding what's actually happening in their own body.
Right. What's hard for me though is, like how do you balance that motivation level, which definitely shifts through the month?
Honestly, that's the biggest challenge. And there's so many excuses. Don't have time. Have to pick up my kids. Have to, all of these other things and responsibilities that we take on, other people's crap that we take on, so to speak, like all of their problems that we try and fix and we carry it and we're trying to solve all of those issues. And then we're trying to deal with our own stuff as well. So that's where I go back. And that's where there's so much work at the beginning of working with me, of really knowing about yourself, to pick out the things that you need to work on. So if you need to introduce meditations, if you need to have affirmations for yourself, if you have to, whatever's going to ground you and help you progress. So that third step I said about progressing to the person that you want to be and achieving the things that you want to do. So really fitness, working out, eating properly, recovery, all those things are just modalities at getting to where you want to be or the person you want to be or the life that you want to actually have.
So I have a couple of questions. So the first one is, you mentioned one of your mantras, which I just love. Selflessness is self-sabotage. Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's
such a big thing.
And that's why it was the first one. When I was sitting down one day and I'm like, I need to write like a mantra, like a list of things and laws and like the most key principles I stand for as a person and as a coach. And the first thing I came up with was selflessness is self-sabotage. As women, we take on everyone else. Call it codependency, call it what you want, but we take on fulfilling other people's wishes or helping them get whatever they want, right?
But it's also learning how to say no.
Exactly. Again, codependency. We're taking care of everyone else instead of worrying about our own stuff. And then we're going down a negative spiral and we don't always see it. So saying no to the right things and taking on the right things and making sure that you're grounded and that you're taking care of yourself. Because if you as a woman do not take care of yourself, you can't actually help anyone else. And we all try and do it. We try and help everyone else before we take care of ourselves. And we realize, man, I'm really tired today. Right? Instead of being like, okay, I need to slow down today. And someone says, oh, Sarah, can you do this? All of these things come at you and say, yeah, I can help you out. And then at the end of the day, you're even more exhausted. So by being selfless, you're really sabotaging yourself. You're really hurting yourself.
Both short-term and long-term.
Of course.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, sort of taking it from that perspective, how are you encouraging women to make time, especially the women that you're working with who are transitioning out of their competitive life and going in perhaps into a regular 9 to 5 job?
Measuring and evaluating where you're spending your time. So if you have an iPhone, and if you go into settings on your iPhone, you can go into a section called screen time, and you can see how many hours a day, how many minutes a day you spend on your cell phone. Specifically, you can look at, I know, right? Specifically, you can see how much time you spend on social media apps, on creativity apps, on productivity apps, like where you're spending your time. You can see a weekly average, and you'll get a notification saying this week you're up or you're down. But then in that app, you can also set downtime, which is huge. Having your cell phone beside you is such an automatic, I'm just going to grab it. Mm-hmm. Right? You just can't help it. We're just like impulsively, we just want to grab it. If you can set downtime, so you can set a time where you have to literally say, yes, I want to access my phone, say from the hours of 10 o'clock at night until 7 in the morning, or depending if you're a 9 to 5er, right? So maybe you actually want to turn your phone off at 8:30 and not really be on your phone because you want to be with your family or your partner or whoever you're spending your time with, or by yourself. Who knows? So you can use your phone to help you with that. But really, honestly, paying attention to where you spend your time. So spending a lot of time on your phone, seeing how many hours a week you spend on Instagram, mindlessly cruising the feed. How many hours a day are you watching? Maybe you love Netflix. How many hours a week are you spending on Netflix? Like, where are you spending your time? And is it helping you move forward? So if you need to turn your brain off and you need to watch Netflix 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever it is, and that helps you, by all means. But if it doesn't, if you're like, man, I just don't have time to go to the gym, and you really want to go to the gym and you really want to be more active, but you're spending 2-3 nights watching TV every night, well, what happens if you take one of those nights away and then you go to the gym one of those nights?
I love that you're approaching it from that way rather than just saying, okay, you should get up early and go before work, which I've tried, and oh my goodness, it's not good.
Yeah, the 6 a.m., 5 a.m. club is not for everybody. Some people like literally, and that perception that I should be getting up, and the most successful people in the world get up at 5 o'clock every day. And that's why they're so successful, and that's why they're CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies. That's great. That works for them. But like, what actually works for you? If you like to get up at 7 o'clock every day and you can get everything in a day that you need, then by all means, go after work, right? But like that, especially in the time changes. Now it's dark at 5 o'clock. Now you're going home and it's the end of the workday and it's dark and it's cold. I don't really want to go to the gym, right? It's really hard. But if you say, I have to do it 1 day a week, right? Instead of getting into that habit of like getting home, cooking dinner, eating dinner, sitting on your butt for hours on end every evening.
Right. So all of this sounds, very hippy dippy and, looking into your personality and stuff. How does that go over with the hockey team that you're working with, or are you not doing that?
Oh, I do it. And to be honest, some of them buy in and some of them don't. So having an athlete buy in is, if you talk to any coach about the philosophy of coaching, within 5 minutes, someone will say the words buy in. And buy in just means to like trust the reason, like trust the source and trust what the whole purpose of everything is. And some of my athletes are 16 to 21 years old, men. So right. You can imagine that they're not buying in 100%, but some of them do, and the ones that do literally go very, very far. So if I tell them to use the downtime section of their iPhone to like actually get off their phone, and I tell them that they need to go to bed. If we play tonight at 7:30 on the road. So I gave them a sleep schedule, when they should have gone to bed last night and when they should wake up and when they should have their pregame nap today. And some of them will do it. On the weekends, sometimes we play a 3 o'clock game. That's a whole different sleep schedule. By giving that information, some of them will buy in and go, okay, it'll help me play better. And some of them won't. And to be honest, this year with this team, our schedule is weird and we have Saturdays off. And when we play a Friday night, we play a Sunday. And on a Saturday, these guys like to lay around and play video games and just kind of relax and literally don't move all day. And then they try and get up to play for a Sunday, and their legs are dead. They're lazy. Like it takes a period or two for them to kind of come out and wake up. So it took literally 2 months with these guys for them to buy in that on a Saturday, yes, you can still relax, but do this like yoga sequence or go for a walk or like give yourself maybe not an errand because they're not really running errands, but like give themselves something in the middle of the day to make them get up, get dressed as if you have to go to work by this certain time, like giving them some structure. And then it does sound hippy dippy, but like if they buy in, you will literally see a massive progression.
You're involved in I mean, just what you just talked about. It seems like you're involved in so much more than I would have expected. Sleep schedule and their days off and stuff. That's great.
It's the whole package. So the level that I work in is minor junior. So it's, if you're familiar with the OHL, it's one tier below that, but the same age group. And the only difference is the players that play in the league that I work in are trying to get a full ride scholarship to NCAA. And so there's a lot of people in the world that want to go and play NCAA hockey. And whatever I can teach them and help them in the years when they're in minor junior, I literally have a lot of opportunity to help them turn into something really amazing. And if they don't go on to hockey after that, or they play a year or something happens and they stop, now the things that they've learned by actually caring so much about hockey will actually transfer over. But like it is a huge like period of their life where it's nothing but hockey, and what you put into it, you'll get out of it. So yeah, it is a lot. It's a lot.
What percentage of your time are you working with the hockey team versus your other coaching?
I work a lot. Probably between 40 and 50 hours a week with the team. And then every, like the time on the bus I spend working on Sarah Ditmars sports performance, and, any other time before and after practice. It's a lot, but it's like literally if I have the means to help someone literally get to another level or go on a scholarship or, help them deal with the horribleness of it all ending. Like I've been on either side of it. I've been not necessarily where these guys are, where they're trying to take hockey to the next level to go to the college level. But I've been at the university level, and I've seen that level. I've seen junior level, and I know what it's like to get out of the game. So I'm just comprehensively putting it all together and trying to make something that no one else has ever done.
And you just won a big award. The trainer of the year. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was a big year. I was named the Ontario Junior Hockey League's trainer of the year. I was the first female recipient. Now,
it's amazing.
After I won that, another female won it the year after with a female runner-up.
That's great.
It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, talk about being one of the few women in an industry that's very male-dominated.
When I first started, I was 23 years old. I had a head coach that did not want a female, and I had to like make a lot of people believe that I was there to literally do a job better than I think anyone ever could do. And I think it's a little bit cocky to say, but like that's literally the goal, is to, I'm going to do this to the best of my ability, but hopefully it's better than the way anyone else could do it by putting so much into it and offering so much value for the guys I work with. And when I first started, there was about 3 to 4 other women. I'm trying to remember and count. There's about 4 other women, I think, in the league. There's 22 teams in the league. I counted the other day, based off of the current rosters and the teams this year. Out of 22 teams, there are 14 teams with a female head therapist. That's 10 more than it was 6 years ago. That's huge.
Yeah,
it's huge. It's literally more common to see a young under 30 or young 30-year-old female on the bench than it is to see the old guy with the towel around his neck. It's literally changing everything. It's changing everything. Like you've got health professionals working in junior hockey, which whether they're male or female, that's one win right there. But the fact that there's women that are doing this job when for forever we were told we couldn't.
We talk about representation on this podcast a lot, and I think it's often minimized how important that is, not just for women to see that job is possible, but for the men around those women to see that it's possible.
Exactly. And after a little while, they forget that you're in the coach's office, you're in the dressing room and doing something, and someone says something that they would never have said around a female, but they don't even acknowledge the fact that
Of
they
course.
said that, because they don't even view you as, like, they know like Sarah's a female, but I'm just there. Like, they don't.
You're doing a job.
I'm just doing my job, and that's, sometimes it's a little bit hard to handle and hard to hear certain things that are said, but at the end of the day, it's like, man, I'm just here to do a job. And if, someone says something that's politically incorrect, or, something that might trigger me a little bit, it's like, okay, it is what it is, and move on. But so there has to be an understanding on the female side of understanding that, boys will be boys, so to speak. But there's never been any sort of mistreatment towards me ever. And to call me one of the guys is probably the most common way of saying, how do you feel about having Sarah around? Well, Sarah, like, whatever, right? Because you're just there to do a job.
Have you ever spoken up when somebody says something and you're like, oh, stop
yeah.
that?
Yeah, no, I have. And then it becomes a little bit of a joke because I want to bring it to their attention, but then they feel a little bit bad about what they said. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you spend so much time with the guys on the team and the coaches, and it's, yeah, sometimes it happens, but I try and keep it. I'm just trying to ignore it.
What's your biggest challenge working in as one of the few females?
A common thing that comes up a lot is that the guys want to hang around my office, which is funny to me. And I always said that, like I said, I have a new coach this year, and I said to him, like, they don't want to hang out with me. Like, I'm really not that nice. Right. And I try and joke to him, like, I'm not really that nice to them. I can just usually say, here, take this and get out, kind of thing. Because you don't really want the guys, strength in numbers to start hanging out in the training room. Like, they have a job to do. They need to be focusing, not hanging out and talking to me about, I wish I scored that goal or whatever it is their problems are, or I broke up with my girlfriend or something. I don't know. That happens too. But yeah, having a coach saying that they just want to hang out, and they're not really hurt. They're just trying to get attention or trying to get some sort of empathy out of me. That's a hard one. I understand it, but like, that's also an important thing to address with a player. We just did a mental health training seminar last night with the team, and it brings a lot of good things to the table, that we have to have an acceptance of having to deal with things where we have to use our mental toughness to get around. Like, we have to work on those things. Like, having a mental health issue, whether that's anxiety or just too much stress that they can't handle, or whatever it is just as important as if they, sprain their shoulder. Like, it's just as important. So I understand where a coach comes from, but that sometimes there is a need for me to be able to help them through some of those things where we need to, like, talk about something. Like, I'm a lot more approachable probably to them than them sometimes going to a coach.
Right. Well, you have a different role also.
Of course, very different role.
Do you have mentors?
Every coach needs a coach. Every coach needs a coach. Of course, I have a couple mentors. Right now, I'm working with a gentleman named Lucas Rubix, who is a brilliant marketer that works specifically with coaches. And when you say the word marketer, you think about, like, okay, someone that helps you sell stuff, right? This guy is so focused on narrowing your message and really understanding the person you want to help. And by developing the former athlete program that I have, it's so important that I understand what they need and how to build something that will really help them. So without him, I don't know that I would have been able to make something over the last couple months that's this dialed in. I'm getting a lot of inquiries, which is amazing. Trying to get the word out there, of course, that it's there and that there's a very comprehensive, in-depth way of helping women make that transition. So it's still very beginner phase, but like it's getting a lot of really great responses.
I'm not surprised. I would bet there are a lot of people that fall into that camp, whether that transition happened, like last week or, several years ago.
Of course. And for a lot of them too, it's like, well, I have kids now and now they're a little bit older where they can kind of focus on some things again. Maybe they stopped playing, years and years ago. And some of the responses are like, I just graduated. Like one of my former in-person athletes. So I actually trained her when she was in high school, senior high school through the first couple of years. She was playing at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. She's playing D1 soccer, and her story is great. She's finishing her 4th year of university, and she still lives with the soccer girls, and they still train. So their season officially ended in October. But if you are going to play the next year, so to speak, then you still train all year round. So she's the only one that's not going to practices anymore, and she's still living and immersed in that environment.
Wow.
So her story is amazing.
Where do you get your fight from?
Being the underdog. People telling me I can't do things. I think we hear that a lot. And sometimes when people don't directly say that, it's like you're kind of looking for that in the way that they speak. It all goes back to my own story, right? And having to feel like I always had to prove myself. It's just part of, like, I guess, the buildup of the person that I am. But constantly working on myself. I constantly have a coach or a mentor. I talk to a lot of people about things. I read a lot of books. I've worked a lot more on myself and understanding the buildup of myself as a person in the last 2 years, and it's made a huge, huge, huge difference in the way that I help other people.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about being the underdog. I mean, somebody else could have just shrunk up and said, "Forget it, I'm not doing it anymore."
So many people, and it's and that's where that self-work at the very beginning is literally like it's mandatory to really evaluate your life and evaluate yourself and evaluate what you need or what you want. And like, there's so many people out there with so many different stories that it's hard to speak to one person and be able to say everything that they're feeling. There's so many people that probably heard a little bit of this podcast thinking, oh yeah, that's me. And then other parts would like, oh yeah, no. And they just kind of shrivel up, like you said, like hunched over and go, yeah, no, maybe not. But like, if you do the work on yourself, it's amazing. It's amazing what you'll get out of it.
Yeah. Well, I like to talk to guests about nutrition, and we've talked a little bit about it. But one of the things I noticed on your website is that you're an advocate for meal prep, which has been a rough go for me, I got to tell you. So I'd love to talk about that.
Oh, of course. I think the conception when you hear the word, like the words meal prep, is that you have to spend the entire Sunday in the kitchen.
Right.
Like the whole day with like a lineup on the counter of different Tupperware containers.
And a lot of vegetables surrounding you.
And a lot of chopping vegetables, which no one enjoys.
Right, exactly.
And so, yeah, my approach is a little bit different. My focus on meal prep is to write the entire week's meal calendar out, which isn't, I didn't invent this. So this has been around forever, but it's the best way that I can kind of direct people in that way, is to write out, Sunday, like every day of the week, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and plan your meal. And if you can plan a meal that has a couple servings, then use that dinner as the following lunch. Chopping up, a couple of celery sticks and stuff like that is fine if it's a snack, but chopping up everything for every meal is a little bit daunting. So handling, say, like I have a recipe for chicken bruschetta, and it makes 4 servings. So then you can have, if there's 2 people in the household, let's say, that's a dinner and a lunch. And you didn't have to make lunch the next day. So after dinner and you clean up dinner, you don't have to make lunches because you've just already used that. So then the following dinner comes around, you do the same thing. Make something that's going to make 3 to 4 servings, and you just kind of use a grid-like system to plan it all out. And then you're doing it a little bit at a time instead of the whole entire Sunday and chopping for days. Like, that's just not something that we can sustain at all. Another hack I have I'm a big morning smoothie kind of person, because you can get so much in. And on a training day, I will add like an extra scoop of like oats, right? Just to get some carbohydrates right in me right away. And so my morning smoothie on a day that I'm lifting is a little bit different than a day that I'm not. So making my recipes and making sure that I have everything I need is great. But then if I put all the ingredients in a freezer bag and label it, Monday, Tuesday, whatever, or whatever type of recipe I have, and then I flatten it and I put it in the freezer, and then that morning I take it out, put some water in my Nutri-Ninja, blend it, and away I go.
Nice.
So now my morning routine is literally like under 10 minutes.
You haven't made coffee yet, though.
Oh, no. So you have to manage it at the same time. So, you get up, you drink your glass of water right away while the kettle's boiling, right? To French press my coffee. And then I get grab my freezer bag out. Okay, now I made my smoothie to go. By the time I'm done that, the water is done. I steep my coffee. I go brush my teeth, get ready for the day, come back, pour that into the canister, and away I go.
Very good.
So it's just like managing what's going to work for you, right? Like if you're not a coffee drinker, you don't have to worry about it. But like, yeah, you just time it all out. But it saves a lot of time than grabbing everything from the freezer, everything from the fridge, making the smoothie. Now that's 15 minutes.
Right.
Right? For all the people that don't have time, they don't like that.
You mentioned your lifting days. So what is your weekly workout schedule?
In hockey season, just because I work a lot more than I do in the summer. In the summer, I'm about 5 days a week. And I go through a little bit more grueling in the summer and in my off season, so to speak, just because I live with the hockey guys so much. In the hockey season, I'm good for about 2 to 3 days a week. But every other day, like every single day, I make sure I'm outside every day for at least an hour. Honestly, like walking at I'm self-employed, so I get a little bit of a luxury of it. But walking from 10 to 11 in the morning is the most peaceful time of the day because everyone's gone to work. There's no one out there. In the morning, you still get the people that are going for a walk before work. And from 10 to 11, there's not a soul. And so I don't live near a lot of people anyways. I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere anyways, but it's so peaceful. So I make sure I get, a walk in every day. And I obviously make sure my food's super good when I'm in season, like when the hockey season's on, because you just, again, it's got to come from food. So it's, 2 to 3 days, maybe 1 really intense lift and 2 just really good flow. So whether that's a bit more movement or the lifts are a little bit lighter, but nothing super grueling at all.
And do you do yoga, meditation, that kind of stuff?
Usually right before bed is the best time that's worked for me. So it helps me just like unwind. And again, I'm not on my phone, and it's maybe 15, 20 minutes of just like light flow. Mm-hmm. But going to yoga, I mean, I can't say that anyone shouldn't do that. I think everyone should do that. I mean, especially if you're a beginner, you're not used to it. Go. It's so relaxing that the meditation at the end can just really like bring you back to center, which again sounds a little bit frilly and like a little bit voodoo out there, but like our minds are so busy of consuming so much information in a day and doing so much for other people. Again, that selflessness and self-sabotage thing comes back, right? Making sure that you can kind of ground yourself. So right before bed, it helps me sleep. It helps my hips move because I have a little bit of a hip tightness that happens all the time on the one side. It makes me kind of be able to deal with that too.
Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks to this week's guest, Sarah Ditmars, for reaching out and making time to be on the podcast. And a big thank you to all of you for listening. Hear Her Sports was started to increase media coverage of female athletes and women in sport. 44% of athletes are women, and only 4% of sports media coverage is about women. That's not a number, it's a rounding error. As women, we're all going to benefit from speaking way up, telling our stories, and listening to stories of other incredible women like my sporty, adventurous guests. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through your favorite podcast player. Subscribe to the Hear Her Sports newsletter or donate on hearhersports.com. Our theme music is by the band Goldmines, our logo by Agnes Studio. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Whether you are a brand new runner or you've been running for years, there is always a new way that running can change your life, and this is what the Planet Runner is all about. Being planted also means you're ready for growth. You can start exactly where you are right now and get better. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and I've coached hundreds of runners of all ages and abilities with science-backed training, nutrition, and mental strength techniques. And on the Planted Runner podcast, I'll share it all with you. You can be a better runner at any age. I'll show you how.